Hey, welcome into another episode of the Fat Guy Podcast. I am the Fat Guy. Most people I know just call me Brett. Sure appreciate you listening today as we continue to talk about losing weight, getting healthier, low carb, ketogenic, intermittent fasting, extended fasting, all the various tools that we have at our disposal to become healthier people. If you've been following my journey, you know that it was insanely successful from the very beginning of keto right up until not long after the passing of my mother, who was my last immediate family member. And just the way all that went down took a severe emotional toll on me, which affected some of the weight that I lost. But this year we were back pretty strong mentally, I thought, which has turned out to be true. Mentally and emotionally, I've been very good this year. I've just been slammed with all kinds of things, man. I was talking to a friend of mine today about how this was the year we were going to conquer. I remember in January, or actually December leading up to January, her and I both were talking about how this was going to be our year and we were going to conquer and things were going to be amazing. And we both had these plans, and we actually both had a joint plan we were going to do together in January. And then leading right into January, I got sick and I come down with some kind of respiratory thing, and it was bronchitis and then walking pneumonia. And I wound up being down almost an entire 3 months or something like that, with a little week and a half or 2 week break in between in there somewhere where I did get a little better, and then it just hit me again. Then I jumped right back on track and I was ready to go, and then I broke my foot, and my foot has never healed. It's never got corrected. I kept seeing different doctors, and they were all, it's fine, you just need to keep walking on it, and the thing would be swollen and red and inflamed and all this stuff. And then that went on for 16 weeks or so, to where I really couldn't do a lot. I just couldn't. I kept trying it, I just couldn't, and that was very frustrating. And then I nearly died from deep vein thrombosis in my leg, which ultimately turned into a saddle pulmonary embolism. So, and that I'm still recovering from that now. So, I guess the overarching story that we can learn from that is you can never really, plan on anything really. If you think you got life figured out, think again. So, I was doing a lot of studying and looking up on carbohydrate this week, processed food, processed sugars, and that type of thing. And it occurred to me that I've made several parallels to what this does to you as a human and as a person, addiction being one of them. And if you haven't heard me talk about that before, I'll touch on it very briefly. But the way sugar is processed and produced so closely mimics the way cocaine is produced. It's quite scary. I saw this debate on the Joe Rogan podcast that he was having with somebody about sugar. And at one point, Joe Rogan said, yeah, but sugar's a food, though. That's different. And I would debate that point. I would debate that sugar is food in any way, shape, form, or fashion. It is a very high-calorie substance. I think for something to classify as a food, it needs to contain more than calories. You could walk through your house and pick up most anything that's laying around in your house, and it's going to contain some calories. Probably low calories, definitely unhealthy calories. There's hardly a substance on the planet that doesn't contain calories. Does that mean everything is food? Then you look at the highly processed part of sugar, and the way that it is processed is just I mean, you might as well just say it's identical to the way they process cocaine. And if you take the coca leaves and chew on them, which people who have that type plant native to them have done for thousands and thousands of years, you get a little bit from it, but that's about it. It's just like if you go get a piece of cane. And when I grew up as a kid, we had a guy down the road from us that had this old cane mill, and he had a donkey or a mule, or I think it was a mule. And this arm came off of this grinder and would hook to this setup on this mule, and he would just walk around in circles, and it would just grind that cane down. But if you take a piece of cane and you just strip a piece off of it, it's like bark, and you chew on it, It's like 95%, 99% fiber, and it's got all this sugar in space in there, so it's sweet. But it's really hard to get a lot of sugar out of there. You got to do a lot of chewing on it, and etc. But you process that down, and then they draw all the sugar out of that cane, and then they take and highly concentrate it down to where it's like 25 to 50 times even stronger. And that's the same thing they do with cocaine. They extract it out of the leaves. They boil it down, extract it down to it's 25, 50, 100 times stronger. So you're dosing your body with something that the good Lord never intended for you to put in it, and your body just can't handle it. It just can't handle it. And so look, the body's very resilient. So if you were to take, some sugar, like they pack in candy, or you get packed full of cake or whatever, and you ate it occasionally, you ate it once a week, ate it once every 2 weeks, your body can recover from that. It's fine. But I did a podcast about this some time ago, talking about how all we eat is cake. And that really is what Americans eat. We just live off cake anymore. Biscuits are cake, muffins are cake, donuts are cake. Pretty much any kind of bread you eat is cake. We take our chicken and fry it and put breading on it, which basically makes it chicken with cake on it. You take the steak. If you're from the South, you got chicken fried steak, country fried steak. It's basically steak with cake on it. You just pile a bunch of cake around it and drop it in a fryer and fry it. Okra. We take okra, which is a reasonably healthy food, deep batter it in cake and fry it. And so it's just literally everything we eat is cake. It's just cake in different forms, but it's just cake. We just live off cake. And there's no way you can be healthy when 90% of your diet is cake. But let's think about a relationship with that and the type of relationship we wound up having. And it really is, and look, I don't mean this to be an insult. So if you're listening to this and you've been a victim of domestic violence in any kind of way, I am in no way diminishing that. So please don't think that I am. But I think there's some parallels to, I obviously have never been, can't personally attest to being a victim of domestic violence. I have some very close friends who have been as well, and got to experience some of that relatively close up. And then, other things that I know about it. But I know that there's some key things that you see a lot of the times in victims of domestic violence. A lot of my experience with that came from when I worked in law enforcement for right at 9 years. And after a while, you find out you're getting called out to the same houses. The women that you get called out for, they would call. You ask them if they want to press charges, they don't. Or if they do decide to press charges and you get them out of that environment, they're back in that environment the next week. And so why is that? Well, it's part of it's a dependency, and I think on multiple levels. Part of it definitely is probably a financial dependency, because you've wound up in that position where it's very difficult to get out from under it. And I think probably a lot of it is an emotional, psychological dependency as well. You just become codependent on a person, emotionally and financially. And, it's really hard to control or do anything about it when you're in that situation, because it's in your house. It's where you live. So you can't really get away from it. You can't get free from it. And I've saw this repeated over and over and over again, to the point that it becomes very dangerous physically, and even in some cases loss of life, which is very tragic and very sad, heartbreaking actually. Especially when you see people who try to intervene and it just seems like you can't. Like, it's so difficult. It's so difficult to intervene in that type of a situation if that person isn't strong enough. If they can't, and this isn't an insult, because it's incredibly hard to get out of. It's just you find yourself trapped into this vortex of dependency and control, and you still love the person. And it's all those things conspire against you to drag you down. And then the other thing that I find that I think is an interesting parallel is how it's always your fault. And so you see this a lot in domestic violence relationships, to where the person being abused is constantly told it's their fault. It's like, God, I love you, but you do these things. It just makes me crazy. It makes me hit you, or it just makes me slam you into the wall. Why do you do these things to me? And the abused person, you'll see a lot of times they actually agree with that. If you ask them about it, they'll go, he loves me, and he didn't. I really shouldn't have provoked him, or I shouldn't have said X, or I shouldn't have said Y. And so it becomes, there's this, it's your fault type mentality that happens as well. And so comparing that to processed food and highly processed sugar and all the stuff that's in our diet today that's so hard to get rid of, I think there are some parallels there. You become very dependent on it. It's highly addictive. If you compare the brains of people who are eating sugar with the brains of people who are taking cocaine, it lights up the exact same reward, pleasure, addiction center of the brain. There's no difference. If anything, the sugar is actually stronger, which is scary if you think about it. Of course, you're going to have the people like I mentioned earlier, like Joe Rogan goes, yeah, but it's food, man. It's different. It's not food. It's a drug. You'll never convince me that processed sugar isn't a drug. It's designed to do one thing, deliver a really high dose of a highly addictive substance that alters your brain chemistry and ultimately has a deleterious effect on your body, just like cocaine does. But you find this dependency on it for a lot of emotional reasons. You'll find dependency on it because of the way it tastes. You can also find a dependency on it because it's cheap. You can buy these cheap, highly processed, highly packed with sugar foods from the middle of the store shelves, and they're really cheap, really, really cheap food. And so I find a parallel in that regard. And then obviously some other really clear parallels are it's in your house, just like we talked about how it's hard for a person who's a victim of abuse to get out of it because it's in their house and they're in that situation and they're kind of trapped. You have this stuff in your house and it's like, again, going back to the point, well, it's food. Well, it seems like food. And so it's there and you're like, well, I got to eat. And you have it there and you can't get rid of it. You can't get off of it. And it just becomes a spiral. That's why I would tell anybody, just like when I, all the many years I tried to quit smoking and I was semi-successful at times and then would relapse. Step number one was also getting everything out of the house. You got cigarettes out of the house. You got lighters. You made sure there was no lighters, no cigarettes, nothing to do with smoking left in the house. You got to do that, number one. Same thing works for when you go on a healthier eating plan. Step one has got to be tossing that stuff out because otherwise you're going to eat it because you paid for it. You're like, well, I paid for it and I don't have that much money and blah, blah, blah. No, it's got to go. It has got to go. And you've got to take a stand. You just have to take a stand. Those things have to go. And then the other parallel, I think, between dependency and this type of codependent violence type situations we see is this notion that it's your fault. And everybody tells you that. Your doctor will tell you that. Dietitians will tell you that. All the many food companies will tell you that. The federal government and dietary guidelines and all that stuff will tell you that. It's like, it's just calories in, calorie out. You just got to make better decisions. You just got to eat less, move more. If you don't do that, it's your fault. And obviously, it should be clear to most people that that's not true. Otherwise, nobody would be fat. If all you had to do was eat less and move more, nobody would be fat because every fat person on the planet has tried that. Every fat person on the planet, at least one time, probably closer to 50 times, has tried to eat less and move more. And it works for a few weeks. It may work for a month or two. It may work for 4 or 5 months. But it does not work long term because that is not the problem. You haven't addressed the hormonal issues related to obesity, which include primarily insulin resistance, insulin being chronically elevated, insulin being the fat storage hormone. So you're constantly in this battle for fat storage versus fat burning. And so you're constantly told it's your fault, though. Your coworkers are going to tell you it's your fault. Your parents are probably going to tell you it's your fault. Your doctor absolutely is going to tell you it's your fault. Well, you just don't have enough willpower. You just don't have enough self-control. And I'm here to tell you, as a person that was fat my whole life and tried everything coming down the pike from the time I think I did my first diet when I was 15 or 16, because that's when that first really, really being interested in girls thing came along. And I remember losing 30 pounds and thinking that I was like, oh, God, this is amazing. But it didn't last long. Lasted, I don't know, a couple months and it was gone. And not only did I gain the 30 back, I gained another 10 or 15 on top of that. Anybody that's listening to this that's had a problem with obesity for any extended period of time can relate to that because that's just how it works. It's this yo-yo effect. And it really is a yo-yo effect. If you just strictly calorie restrict and that's all you do, you don't address the hormonal aspect of it by what it is you're eating, then that yo-yo is going to snap. Your body's metabolism is going to continue to slow to match your decrease in calories. To the standstill comes. Once the standstill comes, you're going to be at your wit's end. You can't go any lower consumption-wise. You're going to be in a constant state of hangry, and bam, here you go right back to it. And when you go back eating again, your metabolism has slowed so much from your consistent calorie restriction that you're now burning so much less calories during the day that eating the same amount of food that you ate before you went on the diet is going to cause you to gain even more weight. So it just skyrockets. And it's a vicious cycle. But I'm here to tell you a few things. You don't have to be dependent on sugar. You don't have to be dependent on cravings. You don't have to be held down by this notion that it's your fault or any of that stuff. There are tools at your disposal that if you stick with them consistently for a relatively short period of time too, look, nothing happens in a day or nothing happens in a week. But I would say within a week, you're well on your way. Whereas with any other kind of way of eating, it only gets harder. The longer you're on it, the harder it gets till it reaches the level of impossibility and then you snap. When you control for sugar and carbohydrate and you primarily get your fuel from protein and fat, you will find that it gets easier the longer you go. It really does, which is a novel concept in the world of trying to eat right and lose weight. So obviously all those things we talked about earlier apply. And once you make the decision to do this, you got to throw that stuff out. You got to throw the pasta out. You got to throw the bread out. You got to throw the Cokes and Pepsis and all that stuff sweetened with sugar out. If you have a sugar container, you just got to throw it out. If you got a bag of sugar, you got to throw it out. All that stuff's got to go. All that stuff's got to go. And you got to replace it with primarily meats and fats and green vegetables. And that's it. That's pretty much what you're going to eat. It's good stuff too. That's the thing about it. It's good. Look, steak and asparagus is good. You grill you a steak, cook you some asparagus, and melt some butter over it. Oh, God, it's so good. And it's not your fault. You got to let that go. This is something that people don't realize. But I'm going to tell you this, and this you can look this up. It's factual. Right now, at this very second, I don't care if you're listening to this at 8 in the morning, 8 at night, or 3 in the morning. In a lab somewhere, there are food scientists combining fats, salts, and sweets together in combinations that will cause you to want to keep eating them once you eat just a little bit of it. That's what they do. There's this thing known as the sweet and savory thresholds, and your body can only take in so much of that and deal with it. A perfect example of that is in these extreme eating competitions. You'll see these guys that are going to eat, 72 ounces of steak or whatever, and they get to the point they can't eat anymore. They are going to throw up and hurl if they eat one more bite of this steak. They'll have somebody bring them out some salty French fries. They'll down a handful of those French fries, and bam, they can go right back to eating the steak. How did they do that? Well, they had reached their fat threshold. They'd reached the savory threshold, but they threw this interrupter in there, this salt threshold, broke it up, and then they could go right back. And these companies are designing this food to trap you and suck you in. That's why you can sit down and eat an entire bag of chips and it's no problem. So it's not your fault unless you have the knowledge and don't act on it. And so that's what I invite you to do today. Look, what's the first step? Let me give you an easy first step. Throw all of your sweetened drinks out. There's no more Cokes, no more Pepsis, no more Mountain Dews, none of that stuff. And for the first few weeks, first month or whatever, don't even think about drinking the diet versions. Just drink water. You can drink water for 2 weeks. You can drink water for 3 weeks. What can I drink that's not water, you ask? Well, let me give you 2 things. Black coffee and unsweetened tea. Now, if the thought of that sounds nasty to you now, just drink water for a couple of weeks and you'll think unsweetened tea tastes amazing. Toss that out. Toss your pastas out and toss your breads out. So there's no sugars, no sweetened drinks, no pastas, no breads. If you'll do that one thing, you'll be amazed at where your weight is at 30 days from now. And then if you want to get more into what keto is about, of course, you can go deeper down the rabbit hole. But just those simple steps to get you started. I hope this podcast helps you in some way. Follow us on social media. Fat Guy Podcast is the name. Subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. By all means, leave us a review and 5 stars if you'd like. That'd mean the world to me. And we'll talk to you next time. Thanks a bunch.